Hey, welcome to 12 Tone. I've been making these videos for a long time now, and as much as I hate to admit it, I haven't always been this good. Like, just last week I remade a video on a topic I first covered in 2016 because I felt like I understood it so much better now. But my most popular videos are generally my song analyses, so sometimes I like to take the time to go back and look at old ones to see if maybe my years of experience will give me something new to add. Last time I did this, we finished on Linkin Park's What I've Done, and the next song on the list is my second most viewed video ever, Pink Floyd's Comfortably Numb, so let's see what I missed. This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Let's get the big one out of the way first. When describing the verse, I notated the bass line, but instead of a bass clef, I accidentally drew a treble clef, and I know that because probably about half the comments on that video are pointing it out. I still get messages about it sometimes, so just to be clear, I know. There's nothing I can do about it now, but yes, I am aware that 3 years ago I drew the wrong squiggle. Sorry. Moving on to real analysis, I want to talk about the chords in the verse for a second. They're playing what I like to call a Stand By Me loop, where it's a 4-chord loop, in this case B minor, A, G, E minor, but instead of giving each one the same amount of space, they rush the last two, playing them for half as long so they can return and play more of the starting chord at the end before the loop repeats. Like, here's the first half, where the chords are nice and long, and now that I've been talking for long enough to hopefully dodge the copyright bots, here's the second half. This gives it a more complete, restful sound. B minor is your harmonic home, and this way you get to spend some extra time there before the journey starts all over again. I also want to look at the melody. In my original video, I talked about how the song uses two drastically different harmonic languages to separate the floaty, distant verse, where the Doctor's words are barely penetrating Pink's mental haze, and the grounded chorus, which takes place in his own mind, but the melody also plays an important role in that. In the verse, we're in B minor, but the melody doesn't revolve around B, the root of the key, it revolves around F sharp, the fifth.
Hello. Is there anybody in there?
There's a couple B's near the end.
Is there anyone home?
But they go by fast and they don't feel that stable. Honestly, it almost sounds like they're resolving to the F sharp, which is a really neat effect. In the chorus, meanwhile, the melody does revolve around the root. We start in D, going back and forth between 1 and 5, and the melody sits mostly on that D as well.
There is no pain, you are receding.
Then the harmony slides down to play 1 and 5 in C instead, and the melody goes with it.
You are only coming through in waves.
Again, we're contrasting a disconnected verse with a pretty heavily grounded chorus. Speaking of the chorus though, I need to talk about the harmony because I got a lot of comments saying that they heard the second part not as 1-5 in C, but as 4-1 in G, and that's really interesting to me because I just don't get it. I don't hear it, I don't see it, and I don't have a very good explanation for it. The best I can come up with is that it's a fairly abrupt key change, so maybe it's hard to hear the first chord is stable, but it's not completely unprepared. They set it up with a G chord to start, and the symmetry between the 1-5 in D and the 1-5 in C feels really appealing to me. Plus, again, the melody's mostly on C here, which makes me feel like that's the root. But just because I don't get it doesn't mean it's wrong. That's the beautiful thing about music theory. There can be multiple correct analyses. The point is to capture and explain your experience, so if you hear it as 4-1, don't let me tell you it's not. You'll have to come up with your own explanation for what it's doing here, because you lose that easy harmonic motif analysis that comes with the 1-5 motion, but hey, finding your own explanations is what makes this fun. If this is how you hear it, I'd love to hear your take on why. And finally, I want to briefly touch on the solos, or not the solos themselves, I'll leave that to the actual guitarists, but the arrangements behind them. Conceptually, these are generally referred to as the light solo, which happens in the middle of the song, and the dark solo at the end. In the light solo, the arrangement carries through from the chorus with a bunch of strings over a bass and drums. It's a nice, relaxed vibe, almost sedated if you will. Check it out. In the dark solo, though, things get, well, darker, and the strings are replaced with a heavily distorted electric guitar playing the verse progression. At this point in the album's story, Pink is reaching his lowest point. He's about to embark on a hallucinatory journey where he imagines himself as a fascist dictator, and the darker, heavier accompaniment shows that evil beginning to consume him. That's about all I've got for this one, so let's move on to the next song, Nirvana's In Bloom. I want to start by looking at the intro, because it's a really interesting example of the 4-chord loop model I've been playing around with recently. Honestly, revisiting this video, I was surprised to see how much I was already using the ideas that would eventually become that model, but still, I think I can handle it better now. Basically, my approach is about defining two different kinds of functions for each chord. The first is a positional function that defines its place within the loop. These are borrowed from the work of Dr. Philip Tagg, who breaks the 4 chords into the tonic, outgoing, medial, and incoming chords. The tonic is like your home base, and the rest of them sort of rotate around it. The other set of functions are behavioral. They define what the chord is doing. Specifically, they describe which chords are being approached by strong harmonic motion and which ones aren't. Let's start with the behavioral functions. The loop alternates between motion by minor third and motion by whole step. Broadly speaking, stepwise motion is strong and third-based motion is weak, so we wind up with what I call a seesaw loop, which means it has two separate destinations. The B flat and the F are both set up by the previous chord, but don't set up the next one, making them the harmonic focal points of the loop. But we can't just look at the harmony in isolation, we have to think about its position too. Now, it might be tempting to think of the B flat as the tonic. It's the first chord in the loop, and later in the song it's pretty clearly established as the 1 chord, but I don't think that's right here. I don't think that matches the experience of listening to the loop because it ignores one critical factor: the rhythm. The G chord is anticipated, which means it gets played before the beat it's supposed to happen on. It jumps the gun, cutting off the B flat chord and making it feel way less prominent, and the A flat chord at the end does a similar thing to the F. Longer chords tend to feel more important, especially if they come with some syncopation to really accent their arrival, so to me, I think the point in this loop that feels most complete is probably the A flat chord at the end. We're starting on the outgoing chord and then winding our way back to the tonic. This means our two destinations are off-center, putting the stronger chords in the weaker positions to make the whole riff feel unbalanced. There's no single point that feels unambiguously resolved. The next thing I want to talk about is the harmony in the verse. For the first half, Kurt Cobain's guitar lays out while Chris Novoselic's bass outlines a minor chord progression. But halfway through, they bring the guitar back in and something weird happens. All the chords are major. In my initial video, I said this was because minor triads don't sound good through distortion, and it's true, they don't. There's a phenomenon called intermodulation where when you run multiple notes through a distortion effect, they wind up interacting and creating a bunch of new inharmonic frequencies, and the more dissonant the intervals are, the gnarlier it sounds. But there's a couple problems with that analysis. First, if you listen to the guitar by itself, there's no distortion. Cobain turned the pedal off here. All I'm hearing is... okay, I suck at guitar pedals, but I think it's a flanger? Something in the flanger family anyway. Point is, no distortion, so no intermodulation. But even if there was, that answer is still a cop-out. I'm a firm believer in the idea that analysis should reflect the listener's experience, and when you listen to a song, you're not worried about the technical limitations of the performer's equipment. That might be why they made a certain decision, but it doesn't affect how you experience it. I think a better explanation comes from looking at the lyrics. In Bloom is about people misinterpreting Cobain's songs, treating them as fun party music and ignoring the important social messages, and taking a progression that's structurally minor and playing major chords instead is a great metaphor for that. It's all shiny and happy, but it's not supposed to be. There's one last thing I want to cover, and it's in the chorus. In my original video, I talked about how they alternate between sections of restful chords with a major melody, for the bit about liking the pretty songs, into unstable chords with a minor melody, when it's revealed that you don't know what they mean. It's a really nice effect driving home the twist through harmonic interactions, but let's check out what Dave Grohl is doing on the drums. Here he is under the restful section, and here he is on the unstable one. Those drum fills create a sense of rhythmic dissonance, emphasizing the relative severity of the lyrics. They really want you to understand what they're trying to say here. Next up is Total Eclipse of the Heart by Bonnie Tyler. I think the broad strokes of this analysis are all pretty good. The song tends to stick closer to traditional functional ideas than most of the stuff I've looked at, and since that's what I was trained in, a lot of my early videos rely on that approach anyway, but there's still some details I want to address. For starters, because the verse piano is played as an arpeggio, you get these really cool descending melodic lines, first from D to B, and then from C sharp to A. In both cases, we're walking down from the third of the chord to the root, creating this slow sense of falling that makes me think of raindrops, or perhaps more appropriately, tears. In between, we hit the ninth of each chord, which is what's called a tension, a note that's not technically a part of the chord, but sounds good over it anyway. This ninth is positioned right on beat 3, the strongest part of the bar besides the downbeat, so that rich, complex tension flavor comes across beautifully, giving the progression a sense of depth and longing. I also want to talk about the way the song uses meter. The verse and chorus are both in 4/4, and the rest of it basically is too, but with these extra bars of 2/4 peppered in. Like, check out the pre-chorus. Notice how it feels like you're hanging on a little bit longer than you should, like you know you're supposed to let go, but you just can't, at least not yet? That sure seems like it might be a metaphor for something. No idea what. Anyway, we see these same extra bars in the bridge. And okay, I don't know how to describe the sections of this song, but the part where she says the total eclipse thing. Yeah, that one. And the last song I want to cover today is the Imperial March. I normally don't do 4 songs in one of these, but Total Eclipse was fast, and this'll be faster. Again, the song is pretty classical, so I'm happy with the bulk of my analysis. The only thing that stood out to me was when I was talking about this bar, and I noticed that the accompaniment switched rhythms. For most of the song, they're playing something like this, which is the iconic Imperial March rhythm, starting with a stately quarter note, bringing in this triplet figure, and then getting overexcited and playing that figure first on the last beat before starting over. It's a beautiful way to build urgency, but in this one bar, they instead just play the first half of the rhythm twice. I wasn't sure why, and honestly I'm still not, but I got some good theories in the comments. My favorite comes from Neurotransmissions, who pointed out that this is the first 2-bar phrase that doesn't start with that stack of octave Gs that serve as our 1 chord, so we can think of the new rhythm as building up tension, which gets released when we go back to the G at the start of the next bar and the normal rhythm resumes. It makes sense, so I'm gonna go with it, but if any of you happen to be friends with John Williams and want to ask what he was thinking here, I'd love to hear his take. And that's it. Next time we'll look at Hurt by 9 Inch Nails, and boy do I have some things to say about that video, but for now, thanks for watching, and hopefully this serves as a good reminder that you should never trust anything I say because I'm making it all up as I go. But hey, that's music theory. This series is all about self-improvement. I've grown a lot as a theorist, and by looking back at some of my early mistakes, I'm hoping you can learn something from them and maybe grow as a theorist too. People don't become experts overnight, but if you want to learn something new, you need to start somewhere, and Skillshare is a great resource for that. Their library is full of experts in all sorts of fields, people who've spent decades perfecting their craft and are ready to pass on their wisdom. Like, if you want to get better at mixing music, they have multiple classes by Grammy-winning audio engineer Young Guru, who walks you through his process of recording, mixing, mastering, and more. He's worked with some of the biggest names in the industry, including Jay-Z and Beyonce, and his classes are full of great insights learned from a lifetime of experience. Plus, they've got classes in songwriting, guitar, music business, and other important skills like productivity, marketing, and graphic design. If you want to check that out, then good news. For a limited time, any 12-tone viewer who clicks the link in the description will get a free trial with complete access to their entire library of courses, and if you like what you see, sticking around is super affordable with premium plans starting under $10 a month. And hey, thanks for watching, thanks to our Patreon patrons for making these videos possible, and extra special thanks to this video's featured patrons, Duck and Howard Levine. If you want to help out and help us pick the next song we analyze too, there's a link to our Patreon on screen now. You can also join our mailing list to find out about new episodes, like, share, comment, subscribe, and above all, keep on rockin'.